Watch Dogs 2 is a third-person open-world stealth action game by Ubisoft, filled to the brim with a wacky cast of diverse, lovable characters, and jam-packed with endless content to explore. And as much as rereading that previous sentence makes me want to send a bullet through my soft palate, I cannot bring myself to hate the game, or for that matter, any other game of its ilk. To be honest, I went into Watch Dogs 2 with zero expectations. Last month, for the first time in my life, I actually had money in my pockets thanks to everybody watching my videos and donating on my Patreon, and so of course the first thing I did was buy a bunch of fucking video games. And after filling up on appetizers, I decided to get a fancy, semi-new PS4 game, and Watch Dogs 2 just so happened to be on sale for $20. I was going in riding off the high that I got from just being able to buy a $20 game without it being financially crippling, and I actually had fun. Before too long, I picked up that anything other than the main missions were a boring waste of time, and after a while I settled into the game's rhythm and generally found myself having a good time. If you asked me to rate it on a 10 out of 10 scale, I would initially give it a 6 out of 10 or 5, the score that I usually give to games that show promise and entertain me throughout the runtime, but I felt were lacking something important, or didn't have a strong enough focus. But if I seriously ruminated on my overall level of enjoyment, what I value in games, and how Watch Dogs 2 just flat out fails at being a consistently enjoyable experience, I'd come to the eventual conclusion that Watch Dogs 2 is simply too fundamentally flawed to garner any score above a 4 from me. Yet I still willingly paid $20 for it, I still played it all the way through, and I still have generally positive feelings towards the experience. According to some commenters on my Skyrim video, this means that I actually love it, and I'm only lying to myself because I just can't admit how much I want to slob all over Todd Howard's knob until his cack blasts down my throat and I choke on all the bugs in his cum. I may be a faggot tranny, but I have standards, people. And this single experience seems to be shockingly indicative of my relationship with these types of games as a whole. If I had to sacrifice one video game genre to the Dark Lord, they'd probably be the runner-up after Cooking Sims, and while I do mourn their lasting effects on the industry, I don't harbor much resentment for the individual games that comprise the genre. And to be completely honest, this isn't even just a Ubisoft problem. It's an everyone problem.
Help! Please! Someone! I'm going to die!
Think to yourself for a moment. Is Spider-Man 2 actually a good game? Everyone says it is because, oh god, the web swinging, I'm gonna come! And all that, and yeah, the web swinging is cool, but what about literally everything else in the game? Unlike most of the games that proliferate the modern video game market, Spider-Man 2 benefited from a strong focus on story missions and all that shit, but how much fun were you having when you weren't just whipping around the city aimlessly because you were high as fuck and had nothing else to do? Did you ever enjoy the combat where you brainlessly mash the attack button like Todd Howard's limp dick? Did those pizza delivery missions really have you dribbling down your pant leg every time you heard that? No, of course not. The game is fucking retarded and everyone knows it. I played the shit out of it, but only because it was so easy to just put on and veg out to. But if there was one thing that Spider-Man 2 benefited from, it was having a strong focus. The open world is mostly there to facilitate the main story and give you a playground for the web-swinging mechanics. There's not even that much to distract you from the main story besides the random events that you'll probably just ignore most of the time. There would be a few more notable open world sandboxes from the era, most notably Hulk Ultimate Destruction and obviously Grand Theft Auto 3, the game which started the whole genre to begin with. It wasn't until the 7th generation the game developers finally got the bright idea to start putting actual stuff to do in their sandboxes. One of these landmark titles was Infamous, released on the PlayStation 3 in 2009 alongside its trashier, less polished cousin Prototype, a game so painfully edgy that you literally shot blood out of your wrist to fly. Infamous 1 and 2 were both relatively inoffensive open-world superhero sandbox games starring Cole McCoolguy or Cole McDickshit, depending on which arbitrary moral choices you stuck to. While it featured a somewhat decent story campaign and a set of tools to facilitate a royal butt-fucking of the city you're in, you'd most likely be spending a lot of your time slogging through unbearably shitty side missions collecting useless garbage all along the way. This is something the game inherited from Assassin's Creed, the malignant tumor that remains latched onto the industry to this very day. Years later, this type of game would eventually evolve into what I like to call the gelatinous cube, or when I'm feeling more generous, the podcast game. The type of uninspired, repetitive collectathon so brainless and stagnant that the only way to enjoy it is while paying attention to something else, i.e. a podcast. Entries in this genre include every Assassin's Creed game, Shadow of Mordor, Far Cry 4, Just Cause 2, and Watch Dogs. Hallmarks of this genre include climbing towers, a play-it-your-way design philosophy, a lack of direction or focus, a strong emphasis on completionism, and being made by Ubisoft. Simply put, these games are made to waste your fucking time. And it's so often in these games, I hear myself asking the same question every time I dig up another buried chest or climb another watchtower. What is this all in service sub. In Assassin's Creed, the money you earn from collecting stuff grants you marginally better equipment, which is usually either purely cosmetic or makes the brain-dead combat even easier. In Shadow of Mordor, you unlock abilities that make the game slightly easier, which in turn lets you engage in more challenging Batman Arkham-esque button-mashing combat and makes climbing towers and collecting herbs slightly more efficient. In Far Cry 4, unlocking upgrades actually makes the game less shitty by letting you add abilities and mechanics that felt like they should have actually been there in the first place. Which, while kind of a dick move, does give you some sense of progression. Just Cause 2 gives you more shit to blow up, which I do respect, but it does not rectify the game's fundamental flaws. Watch Dogs gives you cars and weapons that you'll probably never use. What none of these games seem to understand is that the ultimate reward for doing these things should not be to make the game easier or to make the boring parts go by faster. There shouldn't be any boring parts. The ultimate reward for doing things in the game should be more gameplay. Yes, Shadow of Mordor and Far Cry 4 accomplish this in a sense, but they're basically just drip feeding you more gameplay by giving you back the legs they'd sound off before you'd even started. It should only make sense that if the player enjoys the game and finds it fun, what they want the most is more gameplay, not to be 5% more likely to score critical hits with submachine guns. Even the games which I consider to be the best in the open world genre just don't seem to understand this. Saints Row 4 is an amazing game, and the only way it could be more amazing is if they spent less time on filling it with pointless collectibles and more time on making extra story missions and polishing the mechanics. The Witcher 3 rewards the player with equipment and items, which would be cool if they weren't all severely underpowered or just completely unnecessary. And what baffles me the most is that of all developers, Rockstar seems to be moving backwards in this respect. In Grand Theft Auto 5, almost everything is available to you within the first few hours, and you basically become rich early on without even having to do anything. It would have been pretty cool to work your way up to nice cars and fancy weapons instead of having them all handed to you. Sort of like how it worked in, I don't know, Grand Theft Auto 4? Rockstar is a previous entry in the series? The game where you start out scrubbing your fat cousin's back in the apartment the size of a closet and gradually work your way up to working as a rich henchman for mob bosses, driving sports cars, and multi-bolting big American titties! And in that game, instead of being rewarded with extra attack power and ammo capacity, you get access to entirely new sections of the game, and instead of buying them with experience points and Rockstar Funbucks, you get them by playing the game and having fun. An alien concept, I know, but this was 2008. It was a different time, kids. All of that genius design would have been for nothing if not for how inherently satisfying it is to simply play the game. The heart-pounding acceleration of the engine in a street race with Brucey, the thrill of flawlessly executed assassination, the tingly feeling in your balls during a romantic dinner date with Roman. Speaking of a different time,
Take a straight and stronger course to the corner of your life. Make the White Queen run so.
Jesus Christ, how have I gone this entire video without mentioning the game whose progression relies entirely on organic player actions? Yeah, the game gets a lot of flack from most of the fanbase consisting of children, which I see as a testament to just how simple this solution can be. There's no arbitrary middleman in Minecraft. You chop down the trees to build a house, you mine ore to make armor. The tiers of equipment that you work towards act as a sort of organic barrier to the more complex parts of the game. There's so many ways to go about approaching these barriers, and none of them involve collecting audio logs or climbing radio towers. There's no ability points that you use to upgrade your mining skill, it's just built straight into the game world with no abstraction needed. Despite my cynical outlook and suicidal ideations, I really do love video games, and I want this industry to flourish. And in order to do that, we need to see the most prominent, and by extension, the most problematic genre evolving and improving. And the answer is not collectibles, nor microtransactions, or even upgrade systems. Minecraft achieved critical acclaim and mainstream success with minimalist design and cleverly planned progression. Grand Theft Auto 4 introduced complexity and an emphasis on player rewards into the series without losing sight of the game's main focus. But before we start fixing this industry, we need to know who we're gonna blame on all of this.
Rise from your grave.
It contains a bewildering multiplicity of things to do.
There's always something new to do as you fight.
Dangling dozens upon dozens of tantalizing things in front of you, just begging to be explored.
There's always something new to do.